In the Yakuza, retirement doesn't mean freedom, it means silence. That's a truth etched into the very fabric of Japan's most notorious criminal syndicate, a place where leaving is rarely an option and disappearing is usually a death sentence. But what if there was a case that defied this rule? What if one of their enforcers, a man hardened by years of loyalty and violence, was officially declared retired with no retaliation, no punishment, no whispers of betrayal, and then, just like that, vanished without a trace? You are investigators now, piecing together fragments of a puzzle that refuses to fit. The man's retirement was documented, an official record that should have been impossible. His new identity was accepted by the system, clean and unblemished, as if he had never belonged to the shadows. Yet something about this transition was unsettling, too clean, too smooth, like a carefully erased chalkboard. No one saw him leave. No one heard a warning. No one understood how he slipped through the cracks of an organization that demands control over every breath its members take. This isn't about a crime in progress or a violent showdown. It's about the disappearance of a man who should not have been allowed to disappear. The enforcer who lived in the darkest corners of the underworld suddenly became invisible by design, blending into the mundane rhythm of ordinary life. For years, he maintained a stable routine, forged minimal connections, and carried documents free from any hint of his past. To those around him, he was nothing more than a ghost in plain sight. Then, without warning, he vanished again. No signs of struggle, no crime scene, no evidence of escape, no clues to follow, no suspects to question, just a silence deeper than any shadow he once inhabited. Authorities scrambled to reconstruct his life, but every lead dissolved into uncertainty. What they uncovered was more disturbing than a simple disappearance. The identity he inhabited was not just false, it was engineered to be abandoned. Piece by piece, the layers peeled back to reveal a chilling possibility. This man, once feared and bound by the unyielding codes of the Yakuza, may not have fled from justice or danger. He may have executed one final operation, one last act that transcended violence or escape. He erased himself completely, and in doing so, he challenged everything we thought we knew about survival, loyalty, and the limits of human reinvention. This is the story of a retired Yakuza who didn't just disappear. He vanished from existence itself. Consider this. What does it truly mean to vanish? Not just to leave a place, but to sever every thread connecting you to a past life so completely that even those who once knew you cannot trace your shadow. In the world we think we understand, where identities are anchored by records, faces, and histories, can a person truly erase themselves without leaving a trace? Or are we always marked, even if only by the faintest, almost imperceptible residue? As we delve deeper into this case, it's worth reflecting on the fragile boundary between who we are and what we leave behind. When a man once defined by loyalty, fear, and unbreakable codes chooses to disappear, is it an act of ultimate control or surrender? Is erasure a form of redemption or a final deception? The lines blur between survival and self-annihilation, challenging our assumptions about identity's permanence. You're not just an observer here. Your perspective, your interpretation, is part of the unfolding investigation. What do you think happens to a person who removes themselves so thoroughly from the world? Is it possible to exist without a past? Or does the past cling invisibly, shaping us no matter how far we run? Your thoughts, quiet, tentative, or certain, help shape the narrative we're piecing together. Before we continue, take a moment to consider. What would it take for someone to erase their existence so completely that even those who hunted them or loved them would be left grasping at shadows? And if you were in their place, could you do the same? Or would the weight of your history be a chain you could never unlock? Reflect on these questions, and if you feel compelled, share what you think lies beneath the surface of disappearance. Not just in this story, but in the very idea of vanishing from a life once lived. Your insight matters here, as much as every fact yet to be uncovered. He adopted the name Henry Caldwell, a deliberately generic moniker chosen to blend seamlessly into the background of suburban anonymity. The new identity bore no connection to his former life, no traceable lineage, no distinctive markers to invite curiosity. After the disbandment of his previous existence, Henry settled into a modest, nondescript apartment in a middle-class neighborhood on the outskirts of a mid-sized American city. The building itself was a bland, concrete structure with peeling paint and faded signs of age, the kind of place one passes without a second glance. Nothing about his residence suggested permanence or personality. No decorations, no photographs, just bare walls and functional furniture purchased secondhand. His profession was equally unremarkable, a night shift security guard at a warehouse that handled low-value goods. The job required minimal interaction, mostly a silent vigil through long hours, punctuated by routine patrols along dimly lit corridors. Henry's workdays were strictly regulated by the clock, arriving at precisely 10 p.m., logging in with monotone efficiency, performing his rounds in the same order every night, and signing out without deviation at 6 a.m. The warehouse itself was quiet, its occupants scarce, affording him the perfect environment to remain unseen. There was no ambition in this role, no desire for advancement or recognition. It was a position chosen solely for its invisibility, an occupation that demanded little beyond presence and quiet endurance. His daily routine extended beyond work with surgical precision. Mornings were reserved for solitary walks to the local grocery store, always at the same time, purchasing the same items: plain bread, unseasoned vegetables, generic brand canned goods. Meals were prepared with minimal seasoning, eaten alone and quickly, never lingering over flavors or conversation. His evenings before work were spent in silence, reading manuals on unrelated topics or assembling simple puzzles, activities that required focus but no emotional investment. Sleep followed a strict schedule, with no variation in bedtime or waking hour, enforced by an alarm clock he never muted. The pattern was relentless, unbroken, designed to maintain a low profile to avoid any unexpected encounters or deviations that might attract notice. Social interaction was deliberately limited and superficial. Henry avoided communal areas in his apartment building, declined invitations even when extended, and kept conversations brief and neutral when unavoidable. He spoke in measured tones, never revealing personal details or opinions, maintaining a consistent emotional neutrality that kept others at a distance. Smiles were rare and mechanical, nods automatic responses rather than signs of engagement. He could pass as socially competent, but only to the extent necessary to avoid suspicion. No friendships were formed, no attachments nurtured, no bonds created. This was not loneliness born of isolation, but a calculated withdrawal designed to eliminate vulnerabilities. Every aspect of Henry Caldwell's existence was a carefully constructed facade, a deliberate exercise in erasure. The absence of ambition, conflict, and attachment was not born of resignation or peace, but of strategy. Invisibility was not comfort, it was survival. The routine, the emotional neutrality, the limited interactions, they were tools to mask presence, to blend into the fabric of ordinary life so thoroughly that he might as well have ceased to exist. This was not a fresh start, but a continuation of operational roles, an extension of the same discipline and control that had governed his previous life. The difference was only in the theater of performance. Now, the stage was the mundane, the protagonist was a ghost, and the mission was to become utterly, irrevocably invisible. In the quiet hum of his new existence, the past was a closed book sealed tight, yet no one around him ever questioned its absence. No anecdotes from childhood slipped through his carefully constructed facade. No casual mentions of former colleagues or shared memories emerged during conversations. His home bore no photographs of family or friends, only the minimalist essentials required for daily living. It was as if the man himself had materialized fully formed, untouched by any history. Oddly, this lack of personal detail never sparked suspicion or curiosity. Instead, It was absorbed seamlessly into the fabric of his relationships, as though his silence on the matter was simply a natural part of his character. This seamless erasure was not accidental. It was delivered with an unwavering confidence and a discipline that brooked no challenge. His controlled demeanor acted as a shield, deflecting any probing questions with subtle deflections or brief, noncommittal answers. The precision in his speech, the measured pauses, the deliberate restraint. Each element was a carefully honed tool designed to maintain the illusion. People instinctively accepted the narrative he presented, uncomfortable with the idea of pressing further into a silence that felt almost sacred. Yet beneath this polished exterior, fragments of his former life persisted, not in stories or souvenirs, but in the very way he carried himself. His posture remained unervingly rigid, the kind of upright stance that conveyed both readiness and discipline, reminiscent of countless hours spent in training and rituals far removed from ordinary existence. When he entered a room, his gaze was steady and deliberate, meeting eyes with an intensity that unsettled even the most confident. This was no accidental habit, but a remnant of a code where eye contact was a silent language of respect and dominance. His reactions to authority were equally telling. He never displayed overt defiance or nervous submission. Instead, he responded with a composed acknowledgement, a subtle nod or a quiet acceptance that spoke of internal calculations rather than emotional responses. This nuanced interplay revealed a deeply ingrained understanding of hierarchy and loyalty, traits that had been etched into his very being long before his current life began. Perhaps most striking was his silence under pressure. In moments when others might flinch, hesitate, or fill the void with nervous chatter, he remained unmoved, his calmness almost unnatural. This stillness was not mere stoicism, but an expression of control so absolute it bordered on the uncanny. It was as if the chaos of the outside world was nothing more than background noise, incapable of disturbing the fortress of calm he had built around himself. Before we go further, ask yourself this. If someone erased their past perfectly, would you notice, or would you assume they were just private? It's a question worth pausing on because it touches on something fundamental about how we perceive identity and trust. How often do we accept silence as a sign of mystery or discretion rather than a deliberate concealment? Can the absence of history be as telling as its presence? Feel free to share your thoughts. Do you believe a past can truly be erased, or does it always leave faint traces beneath the surface? Is it possible to start over completely, or are we all shadows of where we've been? Even if we try to hide it, your insights might just reveal more about the man behind the silence than any story ever could. It began with something so ordinary it barely registered as unusual, an insurance claim form that didn't quite add up. The paperwork arrived through routine channels, a minor request to verify residents' history for a standard policy renewal. Nothing flagged urgency or suspicion. Such forms circulated daily in countless variations. Yet, when the clerk ran the applicant's address against public records, a subtle discrepancy surfaced. The registration date for the apartment was listed as 5 years older than the identity claimed. A simple mismatch, easily explainable by clerical error or delayed paperwork, but enough to prompt a second look. Systems designed to catch fraud or identity issues don't operate like human intuition. They don't detect lies in the emotional or narrative sense. Instead, they analyze patterns, data points that should naturally evolve over time. A genuine identity accumulates minor changes. New addresses, updated phone numbers, variations in employment history, shifting affiliations in social databases. It's not about perfection, but growth, irregularity, and gradual transformation. Static records, by contrast, are unnatural. They stand out not because they contradict a known fact, but because they fail to change when change is expected. This particular identity, once pulled from the digital depths, revealed precisely the kind of stasis. The personal data, though comprehensive on the surface, lacked the subtle markers of a life lived. Employment entries remained unchanged for years without promotion or job shifts. Addresses held steady with no gaps or forwarding notices. Social Security records showed steady, unremarkable contributions with no interruptions. It was as if the profile had been created once and then merely maintained, untouched by the usual ebb and flow of real existence. The anomaly was not glaring. The individual had a birth certificate, tax returns, and even a driver's license, all legitimate on their face. What the system sensed, though, was the absence of the invisible fingerprints left by human unpredictability. The identity existed, certainly, but it did not live as a person would. It was a digital shadow, static and unyielding, lacking the texture of time's passage. No alarm sounded. No dramatic alerts interrupted the day's routine. The inconsistency was buried beneath layers of data, easy to dismiss or explain away by overworked agents. It did not scream danger, it whispered doubt. And in a world cluttered with information and noise, whispers are often ignored. Yet, these small bureaucratic cracks are where deeper truths begin to leak through. A single outdated address, an unchanged job title, a tax return filed with the same employer for a decade without variation. They're the faint echoes of an identity constructed rather than lived. Such details are invisible to those outside the system, but stand out unmistakably to the algorithms designed to monitor authenticity. The first crack was minute, almost trivial, but it set in motion a subtle shift in attention, a quiet re-examination of what had been accepted without question. It revealed that beneath the surface of paperwork and databases, the man behind the silence might be less a man than a carefully maintained illusion. The danger was not in what was immediately seen, but in what was missing, the natural evolution of a life that no longer existed. The morning began like any other, with the familiar hum of the city outside and the soft click of keys on a keyboard. His coffee cup sat half full on the desk, cool to the touch but untouched since the previous evening. The calendar on the wall marked the day in neat, unobtrusive handwriting. His chair was pushed back just enough to suggest he'd left momentarily, not hurriedly, as if stepping out for a brief respite. No sign of distress, no hurried phone calls, no scrambled notes or scattered papers that usually accompanied a day thrown into chaos. Minutes passed in a rhythm of quiet routine, the subtle sounds of distant traffic and the occasional rustle of papers the only background noise. His jacket hung neatly on the back of the chair, sleeves folded as if prepared for the return to normalcy. There was no sign of struggle, no indication of panic. The computer screen displayed a document saved and closed with care, not abandoned mid-thought. A single pen lay on the desk, uncapped but unused, as if waiting for something that never came. The apartment was exactly as it had always been. The window was slightly ajar, admitting a gentle breeze that stirred the curtains but disturbed nothing else. On the kitchen counter, a half-eaten sandwich and a glass of water sat undisturbed, a silent testament to an interrupted meal rather than a sudden departure. His shoes remained neatly aligned by the door, not scattered or kicked aside in haste. There was no farewell note, no hurried packing of belongings, no phone left off the hook to avoid calls. The scene was one of quiet completion, not escape. The suitcase in the closet was closed, untouched in weeks. His wallet and keys lay on the hallway table, exactly where they had been placed the night before. Nothing was taken that hadn't been meant to be taken. Nothing was left that suggested a broken plan. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking the passage of time with indifferent precision. It was as if the moment had been rehearsed, a final act executed with calm deliberation rather than desperation. The faint scent of his cologne lingered, not fading into absence, but lingering as a trace, a reminder of presence now gone. Outside, the neighbors went about their routines, unaware of the quiet void left behind. No sirens, no flashing lights, just the steady continuity of life pressing on, indifferent to the sudden absence within the walls of that apartment. The door remained locked, secure in its stillness, neither forced nor left open an invitation. In the files on his desk, a single photograph lay face down, edges worn but untouched. It was the last remnant of a life carefully curated, a life that had been quietly folded away without a trace of chaos. The faint hum of the air conditioner filled the silence, steady and unbroken. This was not the moment of escape or flight, but of completion, an ending designed to leave no loose threads, no unanswered questions that might unravel the carefully constructed illusion. The scene whispered of a decision made long before, a plan set in motion with meticulous care. The disappearance was not a rupture, but a deliberate fading, a vanishing act performed without spectacle or farewell. What was left behind was exactly what needed to remain. What was taken was precisely what was meant to be taken. In the absence of noise, in the stillness of routine interrupted, the truth lay hidden, not in what was seen, but in the quiet certainty that this moment had been waiting to happen all along. The initial response to the disappearance was marked by an almost tangible ambivalence, a hesitation that seeped through every layer of the institutional apparatus. When the report first came in, the authorities found themselves suspended in uncertainty, struggling to classify the event within their rigid frameworks. Was this a missing person case? A voluntary disappearance? Perhaps an administrative oversight? The absence of clear indicators blurred the lines, leaving those tasked with investigating grasping at shadows. No one came forward demanding answers. No frantic calls flooded the precinct. No urgent notices went out. The person in question had no outstanding debts, no known enemies, no recent disputes. Their life was an unremarkable sequence of routines and responsibilities that, paradoxically, made the disappearance all the more confounding. Without a crime to anchor the investigation, the machinery of pursuit faltered. Missing persons units, accustomed to tracing frantic movements or chasing leads fueled by alarm, found themselves without a thread to follow. The case was quietly shelved under categories that seemed to shrug off the gravity of absence. For a time, it was filed as a voluntary disappearance, an assumption that someone had simply chosen to step away from their life. Yet, even this classification felt inadequate. There were no signs of preparation, no indications of farewell notes or financial adjustments. It was as if the person had dissolved into thin air, leaving only the faintest ripple behind. Administrative errors were considered as well, the possibility that bureaucratic lapses had created a phantom absence rather than a real one. But audits and cross-checks yielded no discrepancies. Records aligned perfectly, as if to mock the very idea of a mistake. This institutional hesitation was not born solely of procedure, but of an ingrained expectation. Disappearances that don't scream for attention tend to dissolve quietly, unnoticed until, perhaps, they never are. There was no urgency, no pressure from the public or the media, no sign that a crime had been committed. The absence was a vacuum, one that authorities found difficult to measure or even acknowledge fully. The system's response was muted, almost mechanical, as if the disappearance was merely another statistic to be logged and forgotten. In this silence, the investigation faltered. Standard protocols were followed, but yielded no progress. Interviews with acquaintances brought only vague impressions and contradictory accounts. Without a clear narrative or motive, the case lacked the momentum necessary to compel deeper scrutiny. Each passing day, without new information, diminished the perceived importance of the disappearance, allowing it to slip further into obscurity. It was a perfect vanishing act, not dramatic, not violent, but precise in its execution. The absence was not a rupture, but a seamless erasure, a quiet departure that left no trail and no immediate alarm. The authorities, bound by their own procedures and limitations, found themselves trapped in a limbo where the disappearance was acknowledged but never fully grasped. It was a case with nothing to hold on to, a ghost that defied definition and, ultimately, dissolved into the fabric of unnoticed loss. The identity presented was flawless in its surface detail, meticulously crafted to withstand casual observation and even moderate inquiry. Every official document bore the hallmarks of authenticity: birth certificates, social security numbers, employment records, all seamlessly interwoven into existing bureaucratic frameworks. Yet beneath this facade lay an unsettling void. No genuine connections, no emotional threads tethering this fabricated self to the world. It wasn't a careless forgery relying on haphazard lies or rushed fabrications. Rather, it was a sophisticated construct engineered with precision, designed to simulate existence while remaining fundamentally hollow. This identity was not meant to endure endless scrutiny or deep, sustained investigation. Instead, it was built with a finite lifespan in mind. A temporal shield meant to shield a person long enough to blend into the periphery and then vanish without raising lasting suspicion. The architects behind this creation understood that permanence was neither feasible nor desirable. They engineered a persona that could pass routine verifications and social surface checks, but that would crumble under intense, focused examination. The absence of emotional connections was no oversight. It was a calculated feature. Without genuine relationships, no witnesses could offer testimony rich with detail or contradiction. There were acquaintances, colleagues, neighbors, but none with memories that penetrated beyond superficial facts. The lack of meaningful history was not due to negligence, but by design. The record of this identity's past was a patchwork of plausible yet generic events, all sourced from legitimate data points, but arranged to avoid unique or identifiable patterns. Background stories were thin and unfalsifiable. A transient childhood in several cities, jobs held briefly in various industries, no long-term affiliations with clubs, organizations, or communities. Each piece was true in isolation, yet collectively they failed to form a coherent narrative that could inspire trust or empathy. The social network was a faint echo. Contacts existed mostly as names in a phone book or email list, devoid of shared experiences or emotional resonance. The professional level of this fabrication showed in its subtlety. Unlike amateur attempts that rely on glaring contradictions or easily disprove claims, this identity was constructed to evade the typical red flags. The digital footprint was carefully maintained, with activity logs, social media profiles, and even photos that aligned with the timeline, but were too generic to be traced to a specific individual. The lack of unique identifiers was intentional. The absence of memorable personal details ensured that no one could stake a claim to knowing this person intimately or challenge their story with conflicting anecdotes. This identity's failure under scrutiny was not a failure of craftsmanship, but a testament to its purpose. It was never meant to become a permanent anchor in someone's life story. Rather, it was a temporary vessel, engineered to exist just long enough to facilitate a disappearance, a shadowed passage from presence to absence. When the inevitable deeper investigations began, the persona naturally dissolved because it was never real in the emotional or social sense. It was never meant to withstand the full light of inquiry, only the peripheral glances that allow a person to drift unnoticed. In this way, the case reveals not a botched attempt at deception, but a masterclass in strategic identity engineering. It challenges traditional investigative approaches, demanding new methods that look beyond documents and digital traces toward the intangible connections that define true existence. Here, the absence of evidence is itself evidence of a carefully controlled erasure designed to vanish precisely because it was never meant to be found. Even after years of meticulous reinvention, there was one habit he never abandoned, a subtle, almost imperceptible gesture that spoke volumes to those who recognized it. To most, it was nothing more than a casual flick of the wrist or a brief adjustment of his sleeve, a nuance so slight that it might pass unnoticed. But for those familiar with the shadowed corridors of the Yakuza, it was a quiet signature, a living remnant of a life he had outwardly left behind, yet inwardly carried like a scar beneath the skin. This gesture, the way he rhythmically tapped his fingers against the rough fabric of his jacket or the steady, deliberate manner in which he aligned his cuff just so, was more than mere nervous habit or comfort. It was a ritual born from years of discipline, coded in the language of respect and hierarchy that defined his former world. In the Yakuza, such small, controlled movements were lessons in self-command, signals of status, or silent acknowledgments exchanged between members. To the untrained eye, it might appear as nothing more than a personal tic. But to those who had walked similar paths, it was a beacon, an unspoken truth that identity is never fully shed. This persistence of habit was not a slip or a sign of weakness. Rather, it was an enduring testament to the complexity of transformation. He had not erased the man he once was. He had hidden him beneath layers of new identities, forged with painstaking care. Yet the old self lingered in these minute behaviors, proof that some parts of us resist erasure, no matter how vehemently we attempt to rewrite our stories. Such ingrained rituals are not accidental. They are etched into the muscle memory of the mind and body, surviving even the most radical facades. During interviews, when questioned about his past, he maintained a calm exterior, carefully measured and composed. But moments of solitude, or times when his attention drifted, revealed the truth. His fingers would tap out a rhythm, subtle but insistent, like a metronome keeping time to a forgotten song. It was a reminder that beneath the layers of crafted narratives lay a history that refused to be silenced. This was not a flaw in his disguise, but a thread connecting the present to the past, a quiet rebellion against the notion that identity can be entirely rewritten. Investigators familiar with the Yakuza's codes noted this habit with a mixture of frustration and respect. It was the kind of detail that defied traditional profiling, challenging them to look beyond documents, digital footprints, and spoken words. It demanded an understanding of human nature's stubborn continuity, the persistence of ritual as a form of identity's echo. In the world of shadow crimes, where deception was a currency and masks were many, such a gesture was a rare crack in the facade, a hint that some truths cannot be fully concealed. His inability, or perhaps unwillingness, to relinquish this habit was a subtle admission that the past never truly leaves us. It lingers in the smallest actions, the involuntary muscle memories, the silent gestures that betray even the most careful of lies. It was not a mistake, but a deliberate retention, a quiet assertion that while he could hide his history, he could not erase it. This singular habit thus became a symbol of the intricate dance between concealment and revelation, a living proof that identity is a mosaic, fractured, layered, and never wholly lost. The official reports, meticulously crafted and sanitized, never dared to articulate what lingered beneath the surface, what the investigators themselves seemed reluctant to acknowledge aloud. The disappearance was not a mere escape, a flight into anonymity or reinvention. It was, at its core, a deliberate erasure, a final execution of identity. Not in the sense of physical obliteration, perhaps, but as a conscious severing of all ties, a quiet but irrevocable death of the self that once was. This unspoken truth casts a long shadow over every detail left behind, every lead that dwindled into silence. The Yakuza's role in this disappearance is a puzzle wrapped in deliberate ambiguity. They did not hunt him down with the ferocity one might expect of a betrayed syndicate, nor did they intervene to prevent the unraveling of a man who once belonged to the intricate web of their world. The absence of pursuit is as telling as any act of aggression. It suggests a tacit allowance, a permission granted through omission. Could it be that the Yakuza, masters of control and message, orchestrated this vanishing as a form of mercy or judgment? Perhaps it was a quiet sanction, a way to cleanse a blemish from their order without the spectacle of violence or retribution. The silence that surrounds their inaction speaks volumes, louder than any declaration of guilt or innocence. It is as if they understood that some endings must be unmarked, unspoken, leaving only the void where identity once thrived. The possibility that this disappearance was planned, that it unfolded in accordance with a shadowy script known to few, lingers like a whisper in the margins of every investigation. Not an escape from danger, but a surrender to an inevitability. The man who vanished did not flee a threat so much as he succumbed to a fate inscribed by forces beyond his control, yet perhaps not without his tacit consent. To vanish is to die in a way, less a physical death than a symbolic one, a final severance from the mosaic of self that had defined him. Where others saw a man lost to the undercurrents of criminal domains, the truth may have been far more complex. The careful retention of certain habits, the invisible muscle memories, bore witness to the persistence of a fractured identity refusing to be wholly erased. Yet even these traces could not forestall the ultimate dissolution. The disappearance was less about survival and more about relinquishment, a letting go of the past, or perhaps a final act of control over one's own narrative. Investigators, bound by protocol and the need for definitive conclusions, shied away from this interpretation. It was easier to posit escape, to chase leads and search for signs of life, than to confront the unsettling notion that the man had chosen absence over existence, finality over uncertainty. The silence is not the absence of evidence, but a deliberate void, a space where answers dissolve and questions multiply. In this void, the truth remains elusive, suspended between possibility and silence. The Yakuza's silence, the investigator's reluctance, and the vanished man's lingering gestures converge into a single, haunting certainty. Some disappearances are not escapes. They are executions of identity, performed in the shadows where no witness dares to tread. In the end, the absence of closure weighs heavier than any verdict could. No arrest was ever made, no body ever found, no confession ever uttered. The man who once walked among the shadows of organized crime did not simply vanish. He slipped beyond the reach of history itself. His story is not one that ends with a courtroom drama or a headline. It is a tale suspended in an unyielding silence, a silence that challenges our urge to seek justice and understanding. This silence is not a void of negligence, but a deliberate erasure, a calculated withdrawal from the narrative where truth becomes a ghost. When a figure like this disappears without a trace, the crime transcends its usual boundaries. It becomes less about what was done and more about what was lost, identity, memory, and the very fabric of accountability. The question lingers: can someone truly retire from a life built on shadows? Or does disappearing completely mark the ultimate transgression? Is vanishing not a means of escape, but the final act of control over one's narrative, or perhaps the most chilling form of punishment? The line between disappearance and death blurs, leaving those left behind to wrestle with uncertainty and the gnawing possibility that some things are meant to remain unknowable. We invite you to reflect on this with us. Do you believe that true retirement from organized crime exists, or is it merely an illusion crafted by those who vanish in a thin air? Is the act of disappearing entirely, erasing all ties and histories, an escape, or does it constitute the ultimate crime against the self and society? Share your thoughts in the comments below. This is the essence of shadow crimes, where the focus is not on the act itself, but on what disappears afterward. The shadows left unilluminated, the stories left untold. If you're drawn to mysteries where the crime isn't just about what happened, but about what vanished without a trace, subscribe and join us. Together, we will explore the dark spaces where silence speaks louder than any confession. Because, in the end, some crimes leave scars, others leave silence,